Functional prints are my favorite use case for 3D printing, with one I use often being custom organizational solutions. Sure, plenty of off-the-shelf options exist, but there's something so rewarding about tailoring things to your specific needs. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoy printing out artsy and sculpted models, especially now that my oldest is 2.5 and loves them, but there's nothing quite like using a printer for something practical. We recently did some rearranging of my oldest's room, and in the process stacked 2 cube organizers. While this freed up some ground space, I didn't love how easily the top one slid away from the wall, and wanted to secure them to each other before anchoring. My first thought was, I can print something for this, but before attempting to come up with my own solution, a quick search pulled a bunch of different options made for this exact situation. The plan was to print the pieces, install them, and move on. But I ran into an issue that I was able to solve thanks to the handy tools that have been added to slicers. We often cover the release of new slicer features on this channel, but this felt like the perfect opportunity to actually show them in action, and maybe inspire some of you to use these tools the next time you run into a similar situation. So with all that being said, and without further ado, let's get right into today's video. As mentioned, when I searched for a model to link these cube organizers together, I found a handful of different options. But the one I went with was probably the most minimalistic of them. It's a simple connector that uses the existing screws and screw holes, and I really liked that it wouldn't require any additional drilling. The material inside these organizers is typically just a thin particle board as well as a mesh of a hard cardboard, so I had concerns with damaging it. After importing the model, I used the auto orient button to lay it on the flat face, made a couple copies of it, and sent it off to be printed out of PETG. When I went to go install these, I discovered quickly that while the cube organizers I got is a clone of the IKEA Calyx design, the ones I got being from Target had different spacing from the horizontal edges to those screw holes, so the parts that I printed out were not going to work. To get started on a solution, I grabbed my digital calipers and measured the distance from the center of the screw on the top shelf to the center of the screw on the bottom shelf, and then I headed over to the computer. In this particular case, the designer actually provided the Fusion 360 file, so if you have Fusion, you could just download it and modify it there, but in my case, I use Shaper 3D, which doesn't natively support importing of Fusion files. One solution could have been to just scale down the part in X and Y until the holes were 35 millimeters center to center, which is the exact distance I needed. But the tolerances on the holes were already really tight, and because of the way there's sort of an inlay on this printed part that fits into the existing screw pockets, I really didn't want to do that and then have to drill those holes out. Thankfully, with the tools in the slicer, this isn't necessary. If you're in need of parts for your project but don't have the equipment to produce them, then our friends over at PCBWay and today's video sponsor have you covered. From PCBs, 3D printing, CNC, and sheet metal fabrication, PCBWay is your one-stop shop to get all the pieces you need for your next project. Simply upload your file, choose how many parts you need, along with the specifics on material and post-processing to get a quick quote. Their engineers will even verify the part before they begin processing. For projects big or small, be sure to check out PCBWay and use the link in the description to get $5 off your first order today. In this example, I'm using Bamboo Studio because I am planning on printing out the parts on the A1 Mini, but this will work the exact same way in Orca Slicer, and I am almost positive that Prusa Slicer also has these same tools. The first thing I needed to do was determine the center point to center point length between the two holes. For this, I clicked the part to make it active and then selected the measure tool from the top toolbar. Then I highlighted the mouse over one of the ellipses and clicked so that the center point appeared. Now if I click on the center point and then click on the second ellipse, it automatically measures from center to center. This gave me a value of 40.5 millimeters. And based off of my own measurement, I know that I need that distance to be 35 millimeters. So we need to remove 5.5 millimeters. Next, I'll switch over to the cutting tool. This gives us a plane that we can rotate to split any object into multiple pieces. I'll start by rotating the plane 90 degrees in the x-axis, so that it's positioned to split our part in half down the center. At the bottom of this window, there's a few options that we can choose to determine what we want done after the cut. In this case, we need to select cut to parts, so that when we perform the action, it will cut the pieces and do nothing else. Now when we perform the cut, our single piece is split into two down the center. Even though this piece has been cut into two and the cut is visible if you zoom in at the center, the slicer still treats it as an assembly, and if you try to click on either side, it selects the entire object and can only be moved together. We need to right-click on the part and then under Split, select two objects. In the Objects window, we now have a Part A and Part B, and if we click on either half, it's free to be moved around the build plate. Selecting the right piece will activate the Move tool and change the dropdown from world coordinates to object coordinates. The holes needed to be 5.5 millimeters closer, so we'll enter that value into the Y text box to shift it that amount to the left. At this point, if we go to slice the file, the slicer is going to throw us a warning telling us that we have a conflict of G-code paths. Scrubbing the slider downward, we can see that while these pieces may be overlapped, they are still being seen as two independent pieces, so they have their own overlapping walls and overlapping infill. So the final step of this is to merge those two objects back into a single assembly. To do this, we'll select both halves, right-click, and select Merge. Now when the file's sliced, we don't get any sort of error, and one more time scrubbing through the slider on the right side, we can see that it is now treated as a single piece with no overlapping infill or walls, and it is ready to be sent off to be printed. Once those four parts finish printing, they fit perfectly into the existing screw holes on the organizer, and it's now ready to be anchored to the wall. It blows my mind how far slicers have come over the past few years. Not only do they have advancements in calibration and optimization of jobs, but we now have a full-blown lightweight CAD package directly inside of our slicer, allowing us to modify imported meshes and even create some of our own meshes without ever having to leave the program. I'd love to know how many of you watching utilize some of these mesh modifying tools built into slicers, and also if there is one in particular that happens to be your favorite. Hopefully for those that don't or weren't even aware they existed, this gives you some ideas on how you can tackle a problem in the future when you run into a similar situation. On that note, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. We make a video just about every single week, so there's always fresh content coming your way. If you want to support the channel further, I'll have links in the description over to our Patreon, where there are some really awesome rewards. Huge thank you to all of our existing Patreon supporters. I appreciate each and every one of you for allowing me to come back every single week and spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you all to enjoy. On that note, this has been Daniel from Modbot. I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Peace, guys!